This is the story of David Hartley and his wife Clara couple, who built everything together over 12 years of marriage. David, a methodical architect with a quiet disposition, believed in the permanence of things, buildings, foundations, vows. Claire, vibrant and ambitious, managed the client relations side of their joint architectural firm. They were partners in every sense, or so David thought, until a simple text message began to dismantle the life he'd constructed with such care. What started as a routine disagreement about expanding their business would lead David down a path he never anticipated. One that would reveal not just his wife's betrayal, but his own capacity for decisive action when everything he built stood on the precipice of collapse. The message arrived on a Wednesday evening while David reviewed blueprints for the Riverside project, their firm's largest commission to date. His phone screen illuminated with Claire's name. Need some space. Staying at Mom's for a few days, don't worry. David stared at the words, his coffee growing cold in his hand. They'd argued the night before nothing extraordinary, just the usual tension about hiring Claire's friend Garrett Voss as their new project coordinator. David had reservations. Garrett seemed competent but overly familiar with Claire, their conversations punctuated by inside jokes David didn't understand. Claire had accused him of being controlling, of not trusting her judgment. He'd slept on the couch. But leaving? That felt disproportionate. He typed back, "Claire, can we talk about this?" The reply came an hour later. "Just need to clear my head. Mom and I are going to catch up. I'll call you tomorrow." David knew Claire's mother, Patricia, lived 40 minutes away in a modest townhouse in Fairmont. Claire visited occasionally, though the two had never been particularly close. Patricia had remarried 3 years ago to a retired dentist named Howard, and their phone calls with Claire rarely lasted more than 15 minutes. He tried calling. It went to voicemail. Thursday passed in a fog. David went through the motions at the office, meeting with contractors, approving material orders. Their secretary, Bryn, a perceptive woman in her 50s, noticed his distraction. "Everything all right?" she asked, bringing him the afternoon mail. "Fine," David lied. "Claire's visiting her mother." Bryn's expression flickered with something surprise, maybe, but she simply nodded and left. That evening, David tried calling again. Voicemail. He texted, "How's your mom? When are you coming home?" "Soon. Stop hovering." The terseness stung. In 12 years, even during their worst arguments, Claire had never been cold like this. She'd always been expressive, sometimes exhaustingly so, working through conflict with torrents of words. This silence felt wrong, like a door closing. Friday morning, David woke with a knot in his stomach. 2 days. She'd said a few days, but the vagueness gnawed at him. He made a decision that felt both reasonable and like crossing a line. He would drive to Patricia's house, just to see if Claire was all right. Not to confront, just to check. The drive to Fairmont took 45 minutes through autumn countryside, leaves turning copper and gold. David rehearsed what he'd say. "I was worried. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Reasonable. Caring. Patricia's townhouse sat in a quiet cul-de-sac. David parked across the street, suddenly feeling foolish. What was he doing? But he'd come this far. He walked to the door and rang the bell. Howard answered, wearing gardening gloves and a confused smile. "David? This is unexpected." "Hi, Howard. I'm sorry to drop by. Is Claire here?" "I wanted to talk to her." Howard's confusion deepened. "Claire? No, she's not here. Patricia and I just got back from a long weekend in Charleston yesterday. We haven't seen Claire in months." The words hit David like cold water. "Months," he repeated. "Yes, since July, I think, at that barbecue. Is everything all right?" David's mind raced. Claire had texted that she was staying here, with her mother, who wasn't here and hadn't been. There must be some confusion," David managed. "Sorry to bother you." He walked back to his car on autopilot, Howard's concerned voice calling after him. Inside the vehicle, David sat gripping the steering wheel, his pulse hammering in his ears. Claire had lied. She wasn't at her mother's house. She had never been at her mother's house. So where was she? David sat in his car outside Patricia's townhouse for 20 minutes, his mind cycling through possibilities. Maybe Claire had misunderstood her mother's schedule. Maybe she'd stayed elsewhere and just used Mom's house as shorthand. Maybe there was a rational explanation, but the text had been specific. Mom and I are going to catch up. He pulled out his phone and opened their cellular account. They shared a family plan had for years. It felt invasive, checking her location data. But she'd lied about where she was. That changed things. His fingers trembled slightly as he logged in and accessed the location services. Claire's phone showed active. The pin wasn't in Fairmont. He was back in the city, downtown. The Grandview Hotel. David's stomach dropped. The Grandview was one of the city's premier luxury hotels, soaring glass facade, rooftop bar, rooms starting at $400 a night. They'd attended a wedding there once. Claire had loved it, making comments about the Egyptian cotton sheets and the rainfall showers. Why would she be at a hotel in their own city? He pulled up the location history. She'd been there since Wednesday evening, 2 nights. David started the car and drove back toward the city, his thoughts fragmenting. An affair. The word pushed into his consciousness like an unwanted guest. It explained the lie, the location, the coldness. But with who? Garrett's face surfaced in his mind. The new project coordinator, the easy rapport with Claire, the late meetings. The way she defended hiring him so adamantly. The 45-minute drive felt both endless and too short. David parked in a public garage 2 blocks from the Grandview and walked, the October wind cutting through his jacket. He didn't have a plan. What would he do? March into the hotel and demand to know if his wife was there? The Grandview's lobby was all marble and ambient lighting, a fountain trickling somewhere out of sight. David approached the front desk, where a young woman with an immaculate smile greeted him. "Good evening. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for my wife," David said. "Claire Hartley. I believe she's a guest here." The woman's smile remained professional, but her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "I'm sorry, sir. We can't give out guest information for privacy reasons." "I'm her husband." "I understand, but our policy, please." David heard the desperation in his voice and hated it. "I just need to know if she's here." The woman's expression softened with pity, which somehow made it worse. "I really can't help you, sir. I'm sorry." David stepped away, humiliation burning through him. He found a leather chair in the lobby with a view of the elevators and sat down, pulling out his phone as if checking messages. In reality, he was just trying to look inconspicuous. What was he doing? Sticking out a hotel lobby like a detective in a bad movie? But he stayed. 20 minutes passed. Business travelers came and went. A couple checked in, laughing about something. David's coffee from that morning sat like acid in his stomach. Then the elevator doors opened. Claire stepped out, and David's breath caught. She wore a dress he'd never seen. Charcoal silk, elegant, her hair styled in loose waves. She looked radiant, happy. Beside her walked Garrett Voss. His hand rested on the small of her back, casual and possessive. They moved through the lobby together with the ease of people who knew each other's rhythms, and when they reached the entrance, Garrett leaned down and kissed her temple. Claire turned her face up and kissed him properly, her hand on his chest. David watched from behind a marble column, his entire body numb. Some part of him had hoped he was wrong, that there was an explanation. But there it was, undeniable. His wife, kissing another man in the lobby of a luxury hotel where they'd apparently spent the last 2 nights together. They separated. Claire said something that made Garrett laugh. Then she walked toward the hotel's restaurant while Garrett headed for the exit. David waited until Garrett had disappeared into the evening before standing. His legs felt unsteady. He should confront her. Storm into that restaurant and what? He left the hotel and walked back to his car in a daze, the city lights blurring. When he got home to their empty house in the suburbs, the house they'd designed together, with the reading nook Claire wanted and the home office he needed, David sat in the dark living room. 12 years. They'd built a life, a business, a future. She'd torched it for Garrett Voss. The rage came then, white-hot and clarifying. But beneath it, David felt something else emerging, a cold, calculating resolve. Claire had made her choice. She'd lied, cheated, probably been planning this while smiling at him across the breakfast table. Fine. He'd make choices too. David didn't sleep that night. While Claire was at the Grandview with Garrett, he sat in his home office, surrounded by the blueprints and contracts of their joint architectural firm, and began to think strategically. Hartley and Associates was technically structured as a partnership, 50-50 ownership. But David had founded it 8 years ago, before he and Claire married. She joined as a partner 3 years later when they married, a gesture of commitment and shared dreams. Their lawyer had drawn up the partnership agreement, and David, trusting, optimistic David, had given Claire equal stake without hesitation. Now he pulled out that agreement and read it carefully. There were provisions for dissolution, buyout clauses, protections for intellectual property and client relationships. David had been thorough even in love, apparently. The firm could survive a divorce, but it would be complicated. Their shared clients, their employees, the ongoing projects, everything would be contested. Unless he moved first, David opened his laptop and began documenting everything. He created a secure folder and started organizing files, financial records, client contracts, project timelines, communication logs. He screenshotted Claire's location data from the cellular account, noting the dates and times at the Grandview. He composed a timeline of the last 2 months, noting every late meeting with Garrett, every unexplained absence. At 3 a.m, he emailed their attorney, Martin Grayshome, requesting an urgent meeting for Monday morning. Personal matter. Confidential. Then David turned his attention to the business itself. Hartley and Associates had 3 major ongoing projects: the Riverside development, a municipal library renovation, and a private residence for a tech executive named Theodore Lund. Combined, these represented nearly $2 million in contracts. Claire handled client relations, but David was the lead architect, the creative force. The clients trusted his vision. If the firm split, who would they follow? David drafted careful emails to each client, professional and measured, requesting individual meetings the following week to discuss upcoming transitions in the firm's structure. He didn't mention divorce or Claire, just transitions, restructuring. Saturday morning, he drove to the office. It was empty, weekends usually were. David had keys to everything: the file cabinets, Claire's office, the server room. He started with the financial accounts. Hartley and Associates had 3 business accounts: operating, payroll, and reserves. David and Claire both had authorization on all of them, joint control. But David had set them up initially, and his name was listed first on the paperwork. He called the bank's weekend business line and spoke to a representative, explaining that he needed to update the account authorizations for security purposes. "I'd like to require dual authorization for any transactions over $5,000, effective immediately," he said. "And I need to add an additional security protocol to the reserve account. All withdrawals require my personal approval." The representative processed the changes. David felt a twinge of something: guilt? No, protectiveness. He was protecting what he built. Next, the client files. David copied everything to an encrypted external drive: contracts, correspondence, design files, presentations. Years of work. He wasn't stealing. It was his work. He wasn't stealing. It was his work, but he was securing it. If Claire tried to take clients or sabotage projects during a messy divorce, he'd have backups. In Claire's office, David hesitated. Her desk was neat, decorated with a photo of them from their honeymoon in Greece. They looked impossibly young, Claire's arms around his neck, both of them laughing at something. He turned the photo face down and opened her desk drawers: notebooks, pens, business cards, a drawer of snack bars and mints. Then, in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of folders, David found a burner phone. His hands went cold as he powered it on. The message history loaded. Weeks of texts between Claire and Garrett, flirtation, planning, explicit photos. David's vision tunneled as he scrolled through them. "Can't wait for Wednesday, 2 whole nights. Told Dee, I'm at my mom's." He's so gullible. "After we finalize the Lund project, we should start our own firm. Just us. Our own firm." They'd been planning to leave, to take clients and start a competing business. Claire wasn't just having an affair. She was preparing to betray him professionally, too. David photographed every message with his own phone, then powered down the burner and replaced it exactly where he'd found it. He sat in Claire's chair, surrounded by the evidence of her duplicity, and felt the last remnants of his anguish harden into something else. Determination. Clarity. She'd planned this. Fine. He'd planned better. Claire came home Sunday afternoon. David heard her car in the driveway and watched from the window as she got out, carrying her overnight bag with casual ease. She looked refreshed, happy. She'd spent 3 days with her lover while David had been dismantling her future. He prepared for this, rehearsed it. When she walked in, David was sitting at the dining room table, papers spread before him. He looked up calmly. "How's your mom?" he asked. Claire set down her bag, and for just a second he saw calculation flicker across her face. "She's good. We had a nice time." "Did you?" "Yes." She moved toward the kitchen. "I needed that break. Some perspective." David stood. "Claire, I drove to your mother's house on Friday." She froze, her back to him. "Howard was very confused when I asked if you were there. Said they've been in Charleston all week. Said they haven't seen you since July." Claire turned slowly. Her expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, fear, defiance, before settling on something like resignation. "David, the Grandview Hotel," he continued, his voice steady. "Room 817. You and Garrett. 2 nights, Wednesday through Friday, and I'm guessing last night too." Her face drained of color. "You followed me." "I verified where you actually were since you lied." He gestured to the papers on the table. "I also found the burner phone in your desk. Read all the messages. The plans to start your own firm, to take our clients." Claire's shock gave way to something harder. "You went through my things? You're having an affair with our employee and planning to steal from our business, and you're upset about privacy?" "It's not." She stopped, regrouped. "You don't understand. Garrett and I, we connect in ways you and I never have. And the business, you've always controlled it, David. Every decision, every hire. I'm just the face that smiles at clients while you do the real work." The words were designed to wound, and they did. But David had spent 3 days preparing for this, armoring himself. "I founded Hartley and Associates before we met," he said quietly. "I made you a partner because I loved you, because I thought we were building something together. But you're right about one thing. I do the real work. The designs, the vision, the architecture. You manage relationships." "Exactly. I'm just the..." "And as of Friday, I've restructured those relationships." David picked up one of the documents. "I met with Theodore Lund yesterday. Showed him the preliminary designs for phase 2 of his residence work you've never seen, because I created it. He was impressed. We signed an amended contract. He's remaining with me personally, not the firm. If the partnership dissolves, the Lund project comes with me." Claire stared. "You can't do that." "I did. I met with the Riverside developers this morning. Same conversation. They're invested in my architectural vision, and they've agreed to follow me if there's a split." He set down another paper. "The library renovation board meets tomorrow. I'm confident they'll make the same choice." You're sabotaging. I'm protecting my work," David said, his voice hardening. "Work you plan to steal. I also modified the business account authorizations. Any transaction over $5,000 requires my approval now. You can't withdraw funds. You can't pay yourself a bonus. You can't transfer money to prepare for your grand exit with Garrett." Claire's shock twisted into rage. "You bastard. This is my firm too." "Was," David corrected. "As of tomorrow morning, my attorney is filing dissolution of partnership papers. I'm buying you out at the minimum valuation allowed under our agreement, which, in case you've forgotten, includes a morality clause about conduct detrimental to the business. I'd say sleeping with an employee and planning to poach clients qualifies." "You can't prove." David held up his phone, showing her a photo of the burner phone messages. "I can prove all of it. The fight went out of her then." Claire sank into a chair, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. "So what, you just destroy everything? 12 years? "You destroyed it," David said, and was surprised by how steady his voice remained. when you lied, when you chose Garrett, when you planned to betray not just our marriage, but our business. I'm not destroying anything, Claire. I'm salvaging what I can from what you burned down." She looked up at him, mascara starting to smudge. "I never meant, don't," he cut her off. "I don't need the explanations or the excuses. Here's what happens now. You have until the end of the week to move out. I've already consulted with Merton about the house that was purchased before we married, so it's mine. You'll get the buyout from the business, which is fair market value minus damages. I'm filing for divorce on grounds of adultery. Virginia still recognizes that, in case you're wondering." "David, please? I loved you," he said. And finally, there was emotion in his voice. "I gave you everything. I trusted you with my work, my life, my future, and you threw it away for someone you've known 4 months." Claire was crying now, but David felt nothing. The numbness had become armor. "Garrett's been fired, by the way. Email went out an hour ago. Security will collect his access cards tomorrow." "You can't." "I can. I did. He violated company policy by engaging in an undisclosed relationship with a partner. It's in the employee handbook." David gathered his papers and walked toward the stairs. At the landing, he turned back. Claire sat at the table, her face in her hands, the picture of devastation. Good, some part of him thought. Now she knows how it feels. "One more thing," he said. "Your mother doesn't know yet. I thought you'd want to tell her yourself. But Howard was concerned when I showed up. You should call them." He went upstairs to the guest room, closed the door, and finally let himself feel the full weight of it. The grief, the betrayal, the rage, the loss. He sat on the bed he'd slept in as a guest in his own home and wept for the marriage that had died, the future that wouldn't happen, the partner he'd lost. But beneath the grief, something else was settling into place, the foundation of whatever came next. He protected his work. He'd acted decisively. He'd survived the worst of it. Now he just had to build something new from the rubble. 6 months later, David stood in the converted warehouse that would become the new headquarters of Hartley Design Studio. The space was raw brick and steel beams, flooded with natural light from industrial windows. It needed his work, but the potential was extraordinary. Bryn, who'd left Hartley & Associates to join him as office manager, walked over with paint swatches. "I'm thinking the conference room should be warm neutrals. Make clients feel comfortable." "Your call," David said. "You have better instincts for that than I do." She smiled. Since the divorce, Bryn had become invaluable not just managing logistics, but providing quiet support during the darkest months. She'd known somehow, before David had discovered Claire's affair, had seen the signs he'd missed. The dissolution had been brutal but swift. Claire had contested the buyout valuation initially, but once Merton presented the evidence, the burner phone messages, the location data, the documented plans to steal clients her attorney had advised settlement, she'd walked away with $200,000 and nothing else. No business, no clients, no claims on the house. The firm had been renamed, restructured, and streamlined. David had brought on Yuki Tanaka, a brilliant young architect he'd mentored, as junior partner. They'd kept the major clients, Lund, Riverside, the library, lost a few smaller ones, but gained new projects through word of mouth. The firm was leaner now, more focused, and entirely his. Claire and Garrett had started their own firm as planned. Last David heard, they were struggling. Turned out client relationships were easier to maintain than to build from nothing, and Claire's charm only went so far without David's architectural vision backing it up. He felt no satisfaction in their struggles, no vindication, just a distant, quiet relief that he'd escaped. The divorce had finalized in March. David had attended the hearing alone, watched the judge sign the papers, and walked out of the courthouse into an unseasonably warm spring day. Free. The grief had taken longer to process. Therapy helped. Doctor fight. Raymond Hollis, a clinical psychologist specializing in betrayal trauma, had given David language for what he'd experienced, not just infidelity, but the complete dismantling of perceived reality. "You didn't just lose a wife," Dr. Hollis had said. You lost your understanding of the previous 12 years. That requires rewriting your personal history. David had done that work. Slowly, painfully. He'd gone through old photos, old memories, and tried to see them clearly, the moments he'd missed, the signs he'd ignored, the ways he'd contributed to their disconnect. He accepted responsibility for his part, the long hours, the single-minded focus on work, the assumption that shared goals meant shared happiness. But he also accepted that Claire's choices were her own. She could have communicated, could have suggested counseling, could have ended things honestly instead of lying and scheming. She'd chosen deception, and he'd chosen to survive it. David? Yuki called from across the warehouse. The contractor needs your input on the glass partition specifications. Coming, David called back. As he walked over, he passed the wall where they'd eventually hang completed project photos. Right now it was empty, waiting to be filled with new work. New accomplishments. A new legacy. His phone buzzed. A text from Natalie Winters, a journalist he'd met at an industry event last month. They'd had coffee twice, talked about architecture and urbanism and the ethics of preservation. It hadn't been a date, not officially, but there'd been a spark. Possibility. Still on for the Frank Lloyd Wright exhibit this weekend? David smiled and typed back, absolutely. He wasn't ready for anything serious. Might not be for a while. But he was ready to be open to what came. Ready to trust carefully, love cautiously, and build something that couldn't be so easily dismantled. The warehouse echoed with construction sounds, hammering, drilling, the productive chaos of creation. David looked around at the space, his space, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Genuine excitement about the future. Claire had taken 3 days at a luxury hotel and used them to blow up their life together. David had taken those same 3 days and used them to build an escape route, to protect what mattered, to ensure he'd survive. In the end, that was the difference between them. She'd been willing to destroy everything for a fleeting feeling. He'd been willing to do the hard work of salvaging what remained and constructing something new from the fragments. As Bryn brought over the finalized lease agreements for him to sign, David uncapped his pen and felt the weight of the moment. This was it. The official beginning of the next chapter. He signed his name, David Hartley, sole proprietor, and set down the pen. Behind him, Yuki laughed at something the contractor said. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes and possibility in equal measure. David had lost a marriage, a partner, and the future he'd imagined. But he'd kept himself, his integrity, his work, his capacity to rebuild. And standing in that warehouse full of potential, David realized that might be enough. It might even be better.